And now, a word from our sponsor. Well, technically, 20th Century Dude doesn't have any sponsors for this channel. However, there are a few things that you can throw your support at. For one, physical media has been on the decline for the past several years, which is probably purposeful because of the way media companies are nowadays. So you can go out and do your civic duty and collect everything on Blu-ray or DVD, or if you wanted to go antique, Laserdisc or VHS. Go out and buy physical media. Collect stuff that you really love, or even things that you only maybe sort of like. Because the day is coming when everything that is online will soon come to a crashing halt, and you won't be able to access things such as medical records, or access Google, or even watch movies. You will not be able to do any of those online when the day comes that everything will possibly come crashing down to the ground during the apocalypse. So, do your civic duty, collect everything on a physical reference, download your records and print them out as a physical reference, because honestly, you never know when you're going to need the physical reference. Now, on for our main programming. Don't touch the dial. So apparently the video I released some time ago about my first time watching the Harry Potter movies got a huge influx of viewers as well as a whole bunch of new subscribers to the channel. The video got recommended on a lot of people's feeds, and one commenter wanted to know what I thought about other fantasy series like Chronicles of Narnia, Game of Thrones, and the Lord of the Rings movies. At the time of recording this entry, I haven't watched or read any Narnia material, nor have I had anything to do with Game of Thrones, so I suppose I'll have to save those for a future video. What I have seen plenty of is The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, especially the former trilogy, which is what today's video will be about. I've been watching these films for almost a decade now. I think it was the summer of 2016 when I first got into the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. I started reading Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings books earlier that summer, which for a newcomer with a lack of understanding of the world of Middle-earth prior to reading it, was a very confusing and broad read for me. I also wasn't aware you apparently had to read The Hobbit before reading The Lord of the Rings, something I wish I did first. Anyways, later that summer I did eventually watch the movie Trilogy with a DVD set I borrowed from somebody, and thankfully any confusion I had reading the books, whether it's something about a location or the mass amount of characters to keep track of, went away. Peter Jackson did an incredible job adapting this trilogy from page to screen, and nothing else from the source material can ever be topped ever again. Quite literally, considering where the franchise would be afterwards. Needless to say, I did end up loving the trilogy, enough to make me get it for Christmas on Blu-ray later that year. And now for the main portion of this video. The first movie is The Fellowship of the Ring, which is a very strong start to the rest of the trilogy. The monologue at the beginning is gripping, setting the tone for the journey ahead, but also establishing a very clear backstory as to why things the way they are in the world of Middle-earth. We also get introduced to all the main characters of the Fellowship, which we follow throughout the rest of the story. The Fellowship of the Ring, like the rest of the movies, has a very superb soundtrack composed by Howard Shire. Like, seriously, it's enough to even rival John Williams' best scores in some respects. It's that good. I listen to it at least several times a year. The second movie is The Two Towers, which picks up immediately after the events of The Fellowship of the Ring. Quite fluidly, actually, which makes for a nice double feature if you have 6 literal hours to spare. We also get wider exposure to the Middle-earth world, being introduced to the lands of Rohan, as well as fleshing out other locations like Isengard, and giving us our first full exposure to the character of Gollum, easily one of the most iconic characters from this series probably ever. The CGI for Gollum, which most people would expect to age poorly by today's standards, actually really doesn't. It looks pretty fantastic for a movie from 2002, and in some ways it looks better than almost all the computer graphics used in movies today. Sure, there are ways motion capture has improved since then. I mean, just take a look at Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean, or Caesar from the new Planet of the Apes movies, also done by Andy Serkis. Little known fact though, everyone notes that Gollum was the first motion capture character, but that's actually not true. The first real character is actually J.R.R. Binks, which I know is nobody's favorite character, but technically speaking he actually is the first one, preceding Gollum. After 9/11, The Two Towers was considered to be renamed The White Rider, but ultimately this never went through. Just a little piece of trivia. The third movie is the utterly fantastic The Return of the King, which I'm surprised tops nobody's list when it comes to The Lord of the Rings, because this is easily my favorite of the entire franchise. In fact, I'd even put it on my top 10 or top 15 favorite movies of all time. I understand The Fellowship of the Ring gets a lot of love, and I even have a friend whose favorite film of the franchise is The Two Towers. But seriously, do give this movie some love. At this point in the trilogy, everything that was set up and built to the climax totally pays off. And the ending, as a result, feels so utterly satisfying. Yet we know because of Frodo's arc that not everything goes back to the way it was. There is a saying, you can never really go home again. The people and the towns might be the same, but you aren't. And the director conveyed this so properly. Frodo didn't need to tell us that he didn't feel the same going back to Bag End. We just know, and we feel what he feels. There's still the pain, but also maturity he got from his trek from the Shire to Mordor, which is why he leaves to go to the Grey Havens with Gandalf and the elves, and lets Sam to finish out the story of the Red Book. Oh, and even Sam goes home and gets the girl that he wanted. Very satisfying indeed. Anyways, The Return of the King is very long, but a very superb masterpiece. I know everyone complains about the really long epilogue at the end, but you know what? Who cares? It would be so improper to just end the movie with Sam and Frodo stranded on a volcano. Like, why would that be a better alternative? There's also complaints from Tolkien's most dedicated fans as to why one of the last chapters of the book, The Scouring of the Shire, was not included in the movie. Personally, I feel like leaving it out was a wise decision, as it would have messed with the happy tone that was present throughout the entire epilogue. Besides, it would have been another one more battle situation after the final battle that already occurred. It's the problem a lot of movies have nowadays, with a scenario I call the second third act. Deadpool and Wolverine is probably the most recent example I can think of that suffers from this, having basically a second third act. While I'm sure that it would have been interesting to see the Scouring of the Shire in some kind of form in film, it's also best that it probably wasn't included. Overall, what I like about the entire trilogy, and maybe it's due to the fact that it was from a single director filming all three back to back, is that it feels like a consistent adventure, a very consistent 9-hour adventure, I might add, throughout the entire thing. Then there's the Hobbit trilogy, which I guess I should address, which, compared to The Lord of the Rings, probably feels less than stellar. The first one, The Unexpected Journey, starts out pretty okay, and it has a very nice scene between Bilbo and Gollum, but the Battle of the Five Armies definitely kind of sucks, I'm not gonna lie. It's the one I probably rewatched the least. For this trilogy, the character of Bilbo Baggins is now played by Martin Freeman instead of Ian Holm, although we do get footage of Ian Holm on occasion. Martin Freeman feels like a perfect casting choice for the role of Bilbo, and it's a shame his role gets slowly dwindled down by the time the last movie rolls around. I mean, seriously, it's called The Hobbit for a reason, yet by the time the Battle of the Five Armies rolls around, he barely has any character left, as screen time is given more to the dwarves if anything else. These movies should have been called The Saga of the Dwarves as a result. There's also another reason this trilogy doesn't work as well. It didn't need to be a trilogy! I can understand maybe splitting the movie into two back-to-back movies, but 3 was maybe pushing it quite a bit. A poor choice made by the studio. If I directed these films, I maybe would have split the two after the barrel riding sequence, and then the second movie picks up with the dwarves heading to Lake Town. The Desolation of Smaug also adds a pretty unnecessary romance between a new made-up elf character, Tauriel, and Keely the dwarf. Honestly, it was probably only added to pad out time, and if there ever needed to be a romance for whatever reason, why couldn't Bilbo be the one that was in love with Tauriel? It would have helped to further cement his love for the elves even further, and would have made more sense than some random dwarf. Though, like I said, it would have been some extra plot beat that really didn't need to be in the movie in the first place. It's also quite obvious that Peter Jackson didn't polish these as much as The Lord of the Rings, because he didn't really want to be there. There was also another studio decision, as the original director was supposed to be Guillermo del Toro, but he was cast aside in favor of Jackson, who again, didn't want to be there. You can see that all over the behind-the-scenes footage, looking tired every day on set compared to the enthusiasm he had for The Lord of the Rings. Even Ian McKellen fell asleep in front of the green screens. Another problem, though, is the CGI. Whereas the CGI got better and better with each movie in the first trilogy, With The Hobbit, it appears to get worse. Maybe it's because of the switch from film to digital that also doesn't help and doesn't make everything look as natural and homey like in The Lord of the Rings. We also have to include the decision to go from 23 frames per second to 48, making everything look oddly fluid for some reason. The Lord of the Rings is wonderful and satisfying, and while The Hobbit isn't exactly the worst thing I've ever seen, it definitely feels less than desirable. A lot of different creative choices could have been made instead, but ultimately this is the trilogy we got. I suppose since we're also talking about these movies, then we gotta talk about the extended edition for all these films. I'm a bit mixed on the extended editions for The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. In some ways, the editions are either a great help to the movies or a hindrance. I can understand a lot of the additions made in The Fellowship of the Ring, which, as far as the Lord of the Rings trilogy is concerned, is the best one of the extended editions. The Two Towers is okay. There's an extra scene which explores the relationship between Boromir and Faramir and her father that I really like, but a lot of the added scenes for the Two Towers just weren't extremely necessary for that movie. The Return of the King is also a mixed bag. Some scenes we could have used in the theatrical version, like Saruman's fate, but then there are some really weird additions like the Houses of Healing scene, which were originally in the books, but they are so oddly shoved in the middle of the movie that it ultimately takes you out of the experience. For the Hobbit trilogy, which was already dragged out a bit much, the extended editions didn't do much in that area. There are some scenes that help for character development, but that's about it. Other than that, that's all I have to say about the main portion of this video. There are other stuff out there that I did watch that I want to bring up. There were actually 3 animated movies from back in the 1970s. There was an animated Hobbit movie that I watched, and it was an okay adaptation. It moves through the story at a pretty quick pace, and I mostly remember it because of a small children's book that was adapted from the animated movie that I used to have when I was, well, very tiny. There are also 2 animated The Lord of the Rings movies, one called The Lord of the Rings, which adapts the first 2 books into one movie, and another called The Return of the King, which of course just adapts The Return of the King. The Lord of the Rings is certainly an interesting adaptation in terms of how the filmmakers chose to animate it, using a very intricate rotoscoping process, but it's obvious where they ran out of budget, and near the end of the movie, you can see shots where there are obviously things unfinished. They also rushed through the Two Towers in about 30 to 40 minutes, so you're not really getting anything good from that part of the story. Otherwise, it was a good fair attempt and was very ambitious. There's also a Tolkien biopic from about 5 years ago that I watched, though it's not really historically accurate at all to the author, and kind of took me out of the movie for that reason. We also got a Lord of the Rings The War They Were Here movie last year that's an anime. I didn't watch it when it came out, I only watched it about 2 days ago on Max in preparation for this video. It's not the worst thing ever, but it went maybe a little too far in girl boss territory for my liking. I'll guarantee that nobody will watch this movie years from now, and I might even forget about it as soon as this video is finished. Yep, already forgot. Oh yeah, I also didn't mention The Rings of Power, which I did not watch, and probably will never watch, for a large variety of reasons, which I will not get to them all. Let's just say it sounds like a very poor and lackluster adaptation of the Lord of the Rings appendices, also due in part because Amazon didn't have the rights to adapt the Silmarillion, which I'm sure more people would have much rather have seen a proper adaptation of, including me. No wonder fewer and fewer people are tuning into the show, and somehow Amazon spent over $1 billion for 5 seasons of a program nobody really wants to watch anymore. Not smart, but then again, welcome to the current state of media. Overall, yeah, that's pretty much it for my video of Middle-earth stuff. Plenty to cover, and yes, I'm sure I'll get around to doing Narnia eventually. It's only 3 movies, so I don't know why that wouldn't be much of a problem. The Lord of the Rings is definitely near and dear to me, so that is why it was pretty easy to make a video dissecting this series. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Make sure to tune in for more 20th Century Dude content coming your way. Thank you for your time tuning into this video anyway. This concludes our broadcast today. See ya.